we look at Crucible of the Storms, and it seems like it may not be possible for mortals to get it done. Are we going to see a scenario where all of a sudden one guild is able to tackle this wall and it falls left and right for the guilds progressing around the world? Or is it simply that scientifically impossible for these bosses to fall? To discuss all of that, we have Bay, we have Breach, and Treckie back on the show once again. And Treckie, I'm pretty sure you're supposed to eat a shoe.
We're still waiting.
We'll talk about that at some point later, but we did manage to get the boss down eventually.
Eventually, but was it in shoe eating range or not? I thought that you were off the hook, and then you told me, well, technically the boss died on Saturday. I don't know. If you want to take a bite out of a sandal right now on the stream, I'm not gonna stop you.
We'll see. We'll order in some chocolate shoes eventually.
just be chewing on it during the show, just to soften it up eventually. Just get it in there, just get it. Come on.
I think my slippers are pretty chewy. You know, they could probably last a few hours.
Wow, I never even thought about it like that.
I've never in a position where I've had to consider the type of shoe I would eat. Like, do I want to go for a training shoe? It's a little lighter, or something with a bit of a chew to it. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah,
just don't make the bet.
I feel like with how long this boss is taking to be defeated, we have plenty of time to think about a lot of different things, Breach. So maybe you'll actually get to figure out what type of shoe you want to eat by the end of this one.
Maybe. I mean, I did say it'll die before reset, but this is a wall the boys have hit. A big, big wall.
To break it down a little bit for anyone who maybe hasn't gotten to watch the progress, I know this is a stacked weekend. This is a Attack on Titan weekend, Avengers weekend, Game of Thrones weekend. Like, there's everything going on this weekend, and then on top of that, there's also MDI. So it's kind of tricky to figure out what you want to be watching. So some people may have not actually gotten to see the progress that's happened and what this wall actually is.
Yeah, so to break down what's happened, because it feels like, if you've been watching today, certainly if you just dropped in to see what they're up to, it feels like they've gotten nowhere. It feels like they've literally stood still, but that's not the case. That's really not the case. And it's the same thing we saw with Jaina as well, is they got the information they think is enough in order to start working on the final kill. And they got that after a few times of getting into phase 3. They only had brief periods in there, but they obviously decided, okay, we kind of have enough. We kind of have an idea of what we want to do in phase 3. And that's what this fight is about now. It's no longer about phase 1. It's no longer about phase 2. But in order to get that phase 3 information, they had to play slightly differently. They had to use Bloodlust earlier, which made more consistent attempts at reaching phase 3 to get that information. That's the whole purpose. So today they've decided to remove elements like Bloodlust earlier on, swapping some talents around probably more towards the execute phase, and say, we know how to do phase 1. We know how to do phase 2. We now need to focus entirely on phase 3. But that has in itself made phase 1 and 2 so much harder, because Bloodlust was skipping very bad overlaps, all this kind of stuff. So in a way, they're having to deal with a considerably harder earlier game fight, and they're pushing through sometimes, but it's incredible to see right now. Like, they are wiping in phase 1 more than they have since they almost started progress, because it is so hard, and this fight snowballs so hard that they have to they know deep down they need that Bloodlust. They need those cooldowns in phase 3. Otherwise, the fight will never die. There's no point in us consistently reaching phase 3 and not being able to tackle it, right? There's no point. So they're having to put all this extra pressure on themselves. And we saw this again with Jaina, where they were using things like speed potions during the whiteout to make that consistent, so they could then learn about the further phases of Jaina. But then the time came, no longer can we do that, because we're going to need those potions later. We're going to need that all this ability and resource later on in the fight. So now we have to kind of relearn the early game. And the real astronomical difficulty of this fight is showing itself now, without them being able to sort of bypass certain areas of the fight. And at the moment, they're struggling, because this fight also, as we know, requires on a lot of resurrection of players, intentional resurrection of players. They need that to happen. So any minor mistake that's occurring right now is almost a wipe, because that's just not allowed to happen. So not only is the fight way more difficult, but it's also less forgiving on them as well. They can't waste these anks, Can't waste these reses.
Yeah, THD basically saying when he's talking about theories about how he thinks the boss is going to die, he says self usage of ankhs, like very, very much using those ankhs on purpose with a strategy, getting those resurrections off, even potentially using different things like shamans dropping another totem to try to get some reses off when a death is going to come out. And then you go a step further, and he still thinks at the very end of the fight, you may need half of your raid to die to avoid the debuff that is going out. So this is very much tuned on a razor's edge. But Treckie, I want to talk to you with all the experience that you've had with progression, how often different things like this happen. I think back to Avatar when Preach is talking about these ideas of pushing a fight as far as possible to see as many phases as you can, but then relearning the way that you go about doing the first phases. And with Avatar, for example, they would straight up get themselves to the bottom of the room first, because then if you do get to that second phase, you have those abilities to deal with those mechanics. You have that muscle memory. It's all about getting that first phase done correctly. And then when you drop down, you already have that. I was looking at the first boss in Cabal in this one, and I was like, are people going to mess around with the different relic timing so they can see what each relic is going to be like, even though they're not going to have that damage increase that does happen over time and not experience that? How often is that something that a progression guild thinks about, where they go, okay, we need to just practice this portion of the fight somewhat out of order, almost like filming a movie, and then when it all comes together, when we have enough information, yes, it might be a little bit harder to go about these segments of the fight, but we actually have all the required information?
I mean, generally it's very common, honestly, because there's like two different kind of fight. You bring up Avatar, which has straight up, you can just straight up skip to the second phase, practice it, movement, coordination, and there's some things about Avatar, you need to have him in the perfect position, and that's so much, you can gain so much time by being able to do that right away, instead of like having a 6-minute pull before you can even try attempt this, right? You had a little bit like blockade as well, you know how you have left boat and left right boat, then technically you could just swap the people and they would experience the other side of the boat. And a bunch of stuff like that is very useful to be able to jump into and practice before having to waste like a 7 or 8 minute wipe or like progress pull that everything needs to go perfect before you can get a little bit longer. So anytime you can do that, you try to. And what Method is doing right now is also not uncommon at all. You use Bloodlust early, you invest cooldowns early, and even class stacking to get through phase 1. And then once you're through phase 1, you face another obstacle, right, that you get through. And well, at that point, you know, practice in phase 1 has made you do phase 1 a lot faster, a lot more efficient, a lot better. You can do that now without Bloodlust, without maybe cooldowns there, and maybe using best classes for phase 1, because you need to get through phase 2. So there's always, as long as there's another step that you need to get through, you are very often you make the earlier stages harder for you just so that you can actually get through it. Because otherwise you're gonna just get stuck at the same place all the time.
Yeah, I think that that's an interesting thing to talk about as well, Bay. When you actually look at guilds, how often do they find themselves maybe in a scenario where they're changing stuff so much to get past the first parts of the fight that maybe they're even changing comp? I think back to Jaina, and we did see that happen as well as speed potions. We actually saw different things getting played so they could move a little bit quicker and deal with different things in a certain way. I mean, obviously you see there's a fine line. Like, you look at Shadow Priests in the Jaina encounter, and a Shadow Priest very much has its greatest portion of strength in the beginning phases of the fight, getting around the action movie, being able to get ads off of the boat. Are they as good later? No, but they're a necessary evil. You pretty much include them. In the transition, though, there were some options that were taken, whether it was extra healers, whether it was extra speedy boys, about getting around that mechanic, that it goes, okay, this isn't actually something that we need. We can get past it without this, and we're hurting ourselves a little bit later in the fight. How often do we see composition fluctuations like that, though, Bay, in your mind? Is that something that's common or uncommon?
We were trying to track that during the Battle of Azara lore, and that was one of the interesting things that, and again, in the bubble that we are right now, mainly focusing and then bouncing back and forth with what Method is doing, they rarely make comp swaps. They obviously had one from Restless Cabal to where we are now with Uu'nat, where we saw the huge just swell up of Shadow Priests. And now we have swapped in all those Shadow Priest spots. There are still 2, I believe, in the raid right now. I'm looking at the roster on my other monitor here. We went from that, though, to 4 Elemental Shamans and 6 Warlocks. But then we have the splash of the Balance Druid back in there. So, but they've been sitting at this comp now for quite a while. And I think the big thing about what we're seeing there is that a large portion of their raid ignores the eyeball beam dot that swipes across the room. So that's going to be a huge portion of what their strat's going to be. And they haven't changed in, I think, like 2 or 3 days. And we did see some minor changes for Jaina a lot of the time. I think the one that Mike and I talked about most of the time was when healers were getting swapped. I think Potter changed to like 3 or 4 different healers throughout the entire course of it. One night he was on this one day he was on that one day he was on this one. But that was all we really saw. So I don't really know. We saw the 4 healers, and now they're at 3. So we've seen that minor change. But again, that's the part of it that is strange. With
I feel like they've gotten to phase 3, and they're happy with what they've got. They know what they need to deal with in phase 3. They kind of know what it's going to look like. It's how it's going to work is a totally different story. Like, I think at this point they've seen phase 3 and they have changed their strat now, so they're fully focused on phase 3, which is what they're doing now. I feel like they've actually stopped now and are probably talking ideas because they are stuck. Whether it's a good point or not. I mean, you can get to that point again with Treckie later. Is like when you do reach that point where you're just kind of stuck. Right. What do you do? What is the play? What is the missing link here to make this doable? And what we're seeing is, I think they said, okay, we know what phase 3 is going to look like. The comp works. This is what we need, right? We're going to have to be, because even if you go into something crazy like LFR, you can see how bad phase 3 can go because this guy's got so much HP and you're still going to be baiting the Oblivion tears. You're still going to be dealing with all this stuff while simultaneously having to group the raid up to try and share this leech or just run them away and sacrifice them. But if you do that, then the DPS is going to be maybe too low, while simultaneously in Mythic dealing with the Grand Conjunction mechanic, which is forcing you to spread out, but the players need to stay close. All this is going to happen, and the ranged comp is definitely the way to go there because you don't want the melee having to leave during that phase in order to manage this group up mechanic. You can't stay under the boss anyway. The Oblivion Spheres tears can't be anywhere near that. So you need to be, the range comp is the way to go. Unfortunately, I was still fingers crossed, and I did say this yesterday, that once they saw phase 3, maybe it'd be like, right, we need the melee. We need to bring the boys in wielding the swords. Yeah, we need the swords. We need the daggers. Get the melee off the bench, get them in here and see what we can do. Yeah. But I think they've seen it. They've gone, nope, that is not what needs to happen here. We need to be a big ranged bunch of boys moving around together and keeping everything away, which is unfortunate. I was really hoping there would be a plot twist there and we could see the melee guys come in. Yeah. But it's a tough situation they've got themselves in now because they know what they need to do. But this fight is so punishing. And I know it's a topic I wanted to bring up later, but the contrast from this to Restless Cabal, which I did get to play Restless Cabal today, the Mythic Restless Cabal, is so good. It's actually the contrast between the two is so different that it's nothing they can change with player choice, which is something me and Bay talked about with the Restless Cabal. There's a lot of player choice comes in there, but this fight isn't that way.
I opened by saying it, and I want to bring it up one more time. You know, everybody always talks back to that 4-minute mile and the fact that it was thought to be impossible, and it's like, just run faster, forehead, right? It's one of those things where it's like, it's actually thought that it's impossible. Once people find out that it's not impossible, all of a sudden people around the world can do it, even at the level that high schoolers can do it, right? And it's this idea that is often used that like mortals, once they know that they can do something, humans, once they know that they can do something, they can apply their minds to it, and it's much easier to achieve that goal. And that's one of the things with this fight is it seems like maybe we're not in that range. And that makes it that much harder to get it done because I legitimately look at this fight and to a certain degree think that it might be impossible. And I can't imagine progressing on that boss and having that feeling in the back of your mind that it might be impossible. Does anybody else in this call think that it could be impossible to take down this boss right now?
No, I do not. I do not think that.
It's gonna depend on so many factors as well, but I think, like, especially like being in that situation as well in the past, you know, you get to a point where you have no confirmation that anyone has gotten past us, and you just have to push yourself or try to figure it out because or wait for the nerfs, right? Those are the two options. And then even when the nerfs come, then you want to be as prepared for like on the fight for when they come. And it is such a massive difference knowing if a boss has been killed or that it is killable.
Or there are those people who though have that thing in their head that's broken. Like you have people inside the chat that are like, Josh says it's totally killable, right? That there is actually something mentally absurd about a person that can look at something that's never been done before and goes, oh yeah, no, this is possible, right? Like that is a skill that a lot of people don't have. And when you hear that Josh says, okay, I am crazy enough to believe that not only is this killable, it's totally doable. Like that's the type of person that you believe in on progression. Like that's the type of person that trails to an uncharted place. That's the type of person that honestly believes even after they've wiped 4 times that it's killable in 4 pulls, right? And that's what you need for progression.
It's the mentality you have to have, because we have been burned in the past by saying things like this is not possible. And I think Trekkie's probably got better examples than me that you can get into. But for me, the first one was Alone in the Darkness. And that burned a lot of the big guilds, because Alone in the Darkness, a lot of people looked at it and they were just like, no way. And Treckie probably remembers this happening, and so does probably Bay, is people just didn't even try it. Like people just looked at it, they looked at what needed to be done for Alone in the Darkness. Yorkshire, they were just like, it's just a dumb idea. Like there's no way this is doable. And then boom, I believe it was Stars, just killed it.
Yeah, and Chinese Guild was the only guild crazy enough to just
Stars just turned up and were like, forehead, just bring loads of warlocks, and they just killed it, and everyone went, what? Oh. Like, it's doable? And they were like, yeah, we believed it was doable. We had that mentality, which was like, we can do this. Let's think about the problem. Let's work the problem instead of saying, oh, that's too big of a problem, we'll just wait. No, they said, let's work the problem. Let's figure it out. What's really advantageous here? And that's when we saw like a lot of class stacking coming into play. And they were like, well, we can do this. And that works. That actually gets us somewhere. Maybe if we do this, this works. And then that kill came out of nowhere. And I remember it resounded throughout like the raiding community. It's like, I'm sure it was Stars. Alone in the Darkness has been done. And all before that, all we'd heard from the guilds was almost a very arrogant approach, which was, it's not doable. So no, we're not even bothering to try it, right? Like, what's the point? It's a totally undoable fight. What's it like, Trekkie, when you're in that situation? How do you defeat that mentality? Like, I just don't think this is doable. Because you can't have it. You have to be, because otherwise you'll play slack. You're not going to put as much effort in as you think. It's like, what's the point? We're just going to wipe again and again and again. Like, you have to get out of that mindset and say, no, we could do this, even if it looks insurmountable.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important part is that until you get to a point where you played everything perfectly, there was no mistakes done, everyone played perfectly, and you still couldn't get through like the last bit. Like we saw, I think honestly a really good example of this is Jaina, which we saw last year, right? And Method got there and they started pushing it, and they got to like 20%, and at that point they went all in, and everyone's just looking at the stream or whatever, and they see like that's 15%. That's like more than half of what you did in this phase. It's like, how is that even doable? And then every time they pull, they get a little bit closer and still wipe. They get a little bit closer. Everything looks perfect. We viewers, we see it, and everything looks perfect, and they wipe at 18%. It's like, that's such a far distance to still go. But you look at it and it's like, well, it's a personal fail. Someone messed up. And you don't actually wipe due to the fight being too hard. So until you get to that point where everything went perfectly and you still didn't get it, then a lot of times you just push yourself to play better, play perfectly. And just because if it's just personal mistakes, you can just play better, and you just have to get to those points. And then as long as there's nobody failing, then you can maybe kill the boss.
And how do you deal then? Because we did bring up then that we saw in Jaina is like, we had the guys coming up to us and saying like, the only reason we haven't killed this yet is personal mistakes. People keep making mistakes. You do have to avoid, because you see it in every guild from the top end all the way down, is that guy who dies a little bit more than everybody else. All the eyes start pointing towards him, and they're like, you need to sort your game out. And that can create a very tense atmosphere. Certainly if the raid leader gets very stressed out, and because we've been there, I'm sure everybody in this chat has been there when the raid leader has suddenly freaked out. And I mean, I laugh now. Like, I've seen it so many times. I think it's really funny. Especially, well, my raid leader's a friend, so it makes me laugh even more. But you have those moments which then could spoil the atmosphere because you've got to keep it light. It's one of the things we see in Limit is that their atmosphere is so chill and so relaxed. Not the same in Method, at least from being in comms with the guys. There's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of talk in there. Do you think that's really important when you hit this kind of stage where it's like this is super hard? People will never appreciate how hard this is because we're going to be one of the only ones there, and it's like it's a change before anyone else gets there. But keeping the raid atmosphere, do you feel like it's forced that you've got to keep that raid atmosphere good, or is it better to start calling people out and saying you need to get this together now because we need you to sort it out?
Yeah, I think that kind of depends on the person who's making the mistakes, because some people, obviously nobody wants to make mistakes. Nobody wants to fail. Nobody wants to be the reason for the wiping, or for people to call, oh, we lost this tier because of that person. So everyone tries to push it away, and yeah, sometimes you just get to boss where one person or two people are having more issues than others, and if you cannot replace them, which you would probably want to try to do, and then they will want to try to do better. But at the end of the day, it's if you cannot replace them, you will have to work with them, and then however you can encourage them, either by making sure that they don't want to fail, or making sure that you encourage them to play better. Focus on what you need to focus on and not everything else. Try to I'm not saying tunnel vision, but take away elements that you don't need to stress about, so that you can make sure that you do what you need to do properly. And yeah, I think it just depends on the person there, what kind of criticism you respond best to.
I think that's a very important thing with guild culture as well, right? Everybody does respond to criticism differently, and that is an important part of how the leadership of a guild does function and how every member in the guild does function, because some people need to be called out, and once you're called out, you remember it, and that's how you build the muscle memory. Some people need to be gassed up, right? They need to always have a full tank. It's like, yo, dude, you beautiful, keep going. and that's really good for certain people, right? It gets them firing on all cylinders, and I think that's when you look at a guild like Method and you're like, okay, how long has everybody been in the guild? How well does the leadership know how to interact with this player? Because it is very easy to have those fallacies when a certain player keeps getting targeted by a certain mechanic, and then it's like, okay, X is the problem. Or when they're trying to do something that's really cheeky, like, for example, let's say one class is put on the chopping block to potentially die, but it saves them a bunch of time. When that person's trying to learn that, even think back to Jaina, you have hunters doing incredibly difficult feats. If a hunter screws up there, they're learning a fight in a different way than anyone else. It's very easy to say that player's the problem, but ultimately they're learning a new task. But I will say in a lot of guilds, a lot of the guilds that people in chat have been in, myself, I've been in, all of us have been in, sometimes there is that one player that you're hoping doesn't get targeted by a mechanic, right? And we'll call him Chad in this example. And Chad, everybody's like, oh no, Chad got targeted by this ability. And it's like, oh no, Chad. And Chad wipes the group. And everybody's like, if Chad doesn't get this will be the dream pool, and we'll be able to actually take down the boss. Do you think that in a guild like Method, there are any Chads, Treckie?
I honestly don't really know. I mean, people playing the different characters as well that they might not be perfectly used to either. So someone who's just fails over and over, I don't think that's something that you would iron out way earlier. But there's still going to be a difference in players, right? So some players are going to be more prone to wiping or messing up. But that has everything to do with role spec. Familiar with the class, and then familiar with maybe those specific kind of bosses as well.
Okay, so you don't think that there are any Chads in Method?
I knew that's where you were going. I was just he didn't take it, Rich. He didn't take the bait. He played it cool.
Throwing the bait back. It's like when you go fishing and they don't bite, and you just throw the food at their face, hoping that they'll take it. But yeah, Bang, I do think with this fight, it is a very interesting one, because not only are all of those things going through your mind that typically do happen in a raid race, but all of the tuning knobs, all of the carrots on the stick where you're like, this is how we defeat it, because this is traditionally how we've defeated bosses before, they're taken away. That idea of yes, this is tough, but we are getting stronger in this MMO currently because there's a new tier with new gear. So not only are we getting better, but we're getting stronger with each passing day. that's gone. You're already as beefy as you're going to get for the most part. And Josh even said when he was on the show, he's like, the only place where there really is added strength is if we change comps and we go, okay, let's funnel this all. And that takes a little bit of time, but there isn't a power gain.
The only real power gain that we can see right now is the potential for like min-maxing Azurite traits with the weekly reset from your Mythic Plus box, stuff like that, or Residium farming in a way, or again, it comes down if they want to change the composition in any certain capacity and then go back and do like a whole BOD mythic clear to sort of like gear funnel, trade gear to someone, change a comp in some way. I don't know if there really is like an eye level point that Scripe is looking at, or like a DPS plateau or benchmark they're trying to hit. What Treckie brought up earlier about what we saw that we all witnessed when they were doing Mythic Jaina was that when we finally saw the wall, we were first expecting the wall to be this big, like, oh, how much HP has it got? And then the HP on the wall was like, oh, it's fine, right? And then the timing window, the wall was not a big deal. The time window to get Nathanos out and then move back and then all this little, well, that's fine. And then how much HP does Jaina have at that point, right? And then how much can you put on Jaina during the creeping snow blizzard that, you know, wipes your raid? And then how much do you need to put on the wall only? How much can you move over to her, right? What kind of cooldowns do you use in that regard? How far ahead do you get at that phase? And that last like 20-ish%, and the strat that is used now almost explicitly, I haven't heard of anyone else doing the real strat that the devs probably would have thought you're supposed to do on Mythic Jaina. It's that we just burn and kill her before the second ice orb goes off, right? The weird thing with this fight is that we have seen, let me go back to the recap, Method's best pull was 33%, Exorcist at the 49.8. These are the recorded totals from, I think, yesterday, end of today. Vodka's at 67, Limit only at 75% just from the rate they ever did. Pieces is a question mark. Chat was saying earlier today that other guilds are getting to around that 30% mark, but again, unless it's confirmed and then reported in like a newsy post somewhere, then who knows? But at what point, I wonder, is Scripe, the man with the plan, the pilot in the cockpit with all of his spreadsheets, I'm sure, where does that go to a point where if they can see 20%, but then they have X number of debuffs and Y cooldowns remaining for either throughput or healing oriented or tank cooldowns, and then you know there's maybe 90 more seconds of the fight to even get to 0%, right? Because you can sort of pre-plan that out with how much DPS you have alive. At what point does you get to that internally that Scripe maths out that, oh, we can't live X time to do Y damage. We will just not make it.
Well, I mean, there's a famous saying, this fight is mathematically impossible. And we've heard that old adage multiple times and then seen them get the fight down, right? So that is a very interesting thing to talk about, but I want to go one step. I want to go maybe one step backwards with it and think about history and what we've seen in recent tiers, in recent boss fights, with the amount of pulls that were actually taken to get a boss down. Because we're in we're getting close to the 500 area.
Ooh,
and the last boss fight that I remember, that like the highest amount of pulls that I remember in recent history is what, like close to 700, and that was back in, yeah, I think that was it was like just shy of 700. It was maybe like 670 or something like that. I'm trying to actually remember exactly what it was.
650 or something, I think.
Yeah, 654. Yeah, is what it's
spicy, and the raggy before that, I think.
The weird
that's also with like really bugged, like the first 200 pulls being like basically non-killable phase one, you know. So you go in there, you wipe in like a minute and a half, and then you just do 200 pulls like really quickly, but there's no chance of ever getting through it until it's 6.
It really shows the difference in players as well, right? Because there are a lot of people who look at the guys putting in like, I mean, I'm not just talking about the Method guys here, but the viewers who are looking at like 600 plus pulls and like, I wouldn't ever want to be in this position in my entire life where I have to throw 600 pulls at this boss, let alone using all the potions, all the runes, all the consumables to do this and keep focused for like so many hours a day. While this is also the kind of thing that inspires the new raid as well. It's like, I absolutely want to be there and I want to be a part of this, especially when they see the result of those screams. Like, like THD, who was here yesterday, because I'm an old man now. I used to want to be there, and I don't want to be there anymore. Well, you can see these guys who are like, oh yeah, I want to be a part of this. This is
Yeah.
the dream. I mean, do you feel that? It's overtuned and stuff. I don't think it is. I think this is a technical fight, and this is what I was bringing up earlier. Is Restless Cabal? There's only 2 fights in this tier, but the Restless Cabal is a fight with a lot of player choice. The players can manipulate that fight from which relics they start with, which order they're going to push, when are they going to deflect certain incoming damage, certainly with the abominations that come out. Like they can say, let's pause on that, let's hold back on that, let's maneuver onto this thing. And the players are actually changing and adapting to an ongoing scenario in order to fit what's going to be the best way to deal with it. Then we flip over to this. It looks the same, has the same relics, has all the same void purple stuff flying around, yet completely scripted down to the T. Everything that's going to happen here is going to happen at exactly the same time, and the players have no choice in whether or not they can adapt or deal with it. And that's when it comes to the spreadsheets, like Bay said there. And I think the answer is what we usually see is if you've got everything mathed out and you come up with the answer, it doesn't work. That's when you get really testy, and that's kind of what we're seeing the method guys do, is they say, well, we've got to start cutting some cooldowns somewhere else. And that might mean that we live with 3% HP in a best case scenario, but that's where we need to be to get to this next point. And that's when it gets really scary. And we see the wipes like we've seen today.
That's the one part too to go back on, and chat's talking about Kill Jaden, and the wipes on Kill Jaden would have nowhere been near this many if it wasn't buggy, and that's totally fine. The one thing to also bring up about Kill Jaden compared to Uu'nat, and to piggyback off of what Mike just said, for what we've seen so far of Uu'nat, and yeah, the correction on that is we do have a poll. We have 3 different VODs we're going to go over, and we'll sync them up and we'll watch them. We'll kind of commentate. We're going to look at Naga's POV first. We have the 24.5%. So that's where we're at right now. So the 33 was the end of yesterday. 24.5 was today, just to get updated information. But again, Kill Jaden had a ton of, as I would coin it, flippant RNG. Where, yes, there is a mechanic and a combination of things you have to deal with, but that is what you have to deal with. And if you mess up one of those times...
RNG.
Yeah, but the Uu'nat doesn't have that. Uu'nat is who gets a debuff, the Unending Hunger, sure. Other than that, though, it's everything else, like you said, Mike, is very going to be, this happens here, it combines with this one, but then this one over here combines with that one, and you have to slot in what you do to react to every part of that situation. And that's
and it also resets, which is the important thing.
Sure, yeah.
Because of the way, I mean, even if you look on Heroic, if a couple of people heal Uu'nat in Heroic, you can see how quickly this fight snowballs with the shrinking room, right? It's very obvious it can lead to a wipe. So you can see it there, how quickly it can go wrong. But because he does have this intermission phase periodically throughout the fight, and that's intentional by design, that's so they can say things like, we're going to come back in and we're going to reset all the timers because we actually want you to be able to deal with this insane overlap, which is certainly when the start of phase 3 comes out. And they've done that by design, so you can't push the DPS faster to avoid that. If we lust early, maybe we get a different timing later down the line with spell queuing like we saw in Jaina. So it's like maybe we get different orders of things happening. They're like, no, you'll get to this bit and then we're going to stop. Then we're going to start the timers again because we want to make sure that you're dealing with this in its most difficult form. And then we're going to do that again in phase 3. And this fight is entirely designed around trying to stop the players sort of wiggling their way out of difficult scenarios as much as possible.
Yeah, I think what both of you guys said is super insightful and very intelligent. So I'm going to say something a little bit papiga right now. The other thing that you have to note is as much as there are so many pulls that have gone through right now, it's a very different take on what a raid looks like, because usually you have to go through a bunch of other bosses with 200 pulls, right? So you think about another raids here. You even think about what happened in BOD, in the Battle of Dazzle-Ador, and ultimately to even get pulls in on that final boss in the raid, you have what? Couple thousand of pulls, right? To even get there. So it's a different type of gauntlet. Now you get here, and you basically have all the pulls for a raid potentially on one boss. I love that idea. I think that that's such a cool thing to experiment with because it is airtight. It's not focused on RNG. You're not necessarily waiting for the perfect pull, but you need to become a god at one encounter. I think that's a very interesting way to look at tuning a fight.
And still keeping focus on these earlier phases that you're kind of done with. Because they're still extraordinarily difficult. And as we've seen now, the guys have actually put more pressure on themselves in this phase 1, which is what they've been doing today, is they put so much more pressure on themselves in phase 1, is that you can't get lazy there and be like, well, I'm kind of used to phase one. And I know when we were progressing Jaina and going for the kill, phase one is insanely hard on Jaina with a lot of RNG and spell queuing and different variations. Yet I still felt incredibly comfortable and relaxed and almost like zoned out sometimes, because no matter how crazy it got, you can kind of be like, I've seen this before and I know how to deal with it and it's fine. And then suddenly you die. I'm not giving it the respect it's due whatsoever to how crazy this fight actually is. And then you kind of got to get yourself back into the mindset, and hopefully that doesn't travel through all the other raiders.
This is why I also kind of thought that watching this fight, a couple comments come up about the fight looks really boring to watch. But when we heard from Josh doing the commentary section a couple days ago, keeping up with just the first 2 phases of the fight at the time, we had to pause and I had to backtrack and unpause, letting him catch up with the things, the decisions they had made, because he couldn't talk fast enough to go over all the different things they have figured out about how they deal with certain parts of the different pieces of the fight, which again makes me think back to Blackhand and in Blackrock Foundry, where it was this very short fight, this 6-ish, 7-minute long encounter, which arguably the community did kind of cheese with Brewmaster monks on the tanks, but it was very much a go, 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 start to finish encounter. You got in, got out. The difference is Uu'nat is like that, but it's twice as long of an encounter. You're looking at like a 12
I bet
to 13
it feels
kill.
like half as long, though. I would guarantee you.
Well, like you're in the fight and all of a sudden you're in phase 2.
Yeah,
mentally.
For sure, yeah. It's because it's so intense. Like Blackhand, I hated progressing Blackhand because I actually felt it was very slow.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys felt the same. It's like there's a lot going on, but you know, you got the first phase, you circle around and then you repeat that pretty quickly, right? You're just circling around the room, and then you've got the next phase where you're just kind of killing the tanks. And then the last phase is kind of interesting. Like, there's a lot going on there for sure. Not some barriers, but it felt like a 6-minute fight. And I would say even going back. Lich King. Yeah, go on. Sorry.
No, just sorry to interrupt. I didn't mean to. I just feel like when I look back at Lich King, when I remember doing that fight, it felt like a 2-minute encounter all the way up to like that final phase for me when it really slows down. Like it felt so fast, but then you realize that you've been pulling for, 3-4 hours just to get to that phase. And as fast as it seems, you're actually taking, 10 minutes to even get there each pull. It's a very important thing to think about, though, that mental tax that it takes to go through it. But if the fight feels a certain way, you feel like you're flying through it. You're ready to get to that next part time and time again.
That's our best points in gaming, right? When you sit down, you turn around, and it's morning. You're like,
how? What have I done?
Well, people are like, you've been playing for 13 hours. Like, I don't know.
Where am I? What meal am I supposed to eat?
There's a certain charm with bosses that have that kind of like, you just have to go through a pattern and you just walk around, and when you do that properly as a guild, it just feels like everything's kind of coming together, and the time, and whenever everyone does that properly, the time kind of stops meaning as much, because you're not looking at like, well, this is the 1 minute mark, this is the 2 minute mark, but you just have to do the mechanics as they come up. And like there's been a lot of encounters that I feel like that's really the case.
Yeah.
Intermissions generally doesn't help, but like you said, Lich King, right? You do the first phase, you move around, dance around, then you do intermissions. Like there's not really much breathing room until you get like sucked in the mythic phase there. But Uu'nat, as you said, basically scripted encounters. A few obviously RNG elements with what buffs you get and what you have to run. But otherwise, you just like, you get in the zone, you do what you do at this point, and then after 100 pulls, you just like repeat, and just gotta cut out on like the small errors and stuff like that.
So 500 pulls is right now.
I have the VOD ready to go. Yeah. I can give the time code if you want to go with me on this.
Yeah.
So let's do this. This is going to be Naga's POV of the 24.5% wipe, and we will hit play in 3, 2, 1. But
oh no, I'm kidding.
Was that
start it over?
Was that Martin's spacebar? Just be kind to
No,
it.
that was a mouse.
Oh my god, jeez, just be gentle touch.
He smashed it, dude.
My goodness. Ooh, goodness me. But we're gonna see a lot of the. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be a different phase one because we've looked at a lot of the VODs each night we've been covering this. But now we're going to see a much more difficult phase one, which is going to highlight just how much harder this has come for these guys, simply because of the fact they don't have Bloodlust, and they were using that for such an intentional reason that we're going to see shortly, which skips when the room is at its smallest and all the debuffs come in, that was something they were able to skip back, just a couple of days ago, and now they know they can't do that anymore. So this has been this phase has been a relearning process for the guys, and it starts off in an almost so simple way. And this is something that Josh was saying to us when he's healing it. Is like, it's actually quite relaxed for this period of time.
Yeah.
And then suddenly the fight just goes, but there's more. It turns itself into an absolute nightmare. I love this bowling pin formation that the Warlocks have set up.
It's very funny to watch them all blip, 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 blip in.
Yeah. They all just
they're set at a distance.
Yeah,
they set at a distance so that when right as you get this a non-stacking debuff, like everyone's already spread out. You take the teleport, you're instantly there, and you can just stay there, keep DPSing.
And now you're going to see the well, they didn't actually hit it, but the MC, and this is what THD was talking about, is this MC, which is not really an MC. It just kind of it makes you hostile, so you can't be healed or anything like that when it hits you. But if it's a DPS loss to run all the way around it, and you're comfortable enough with the fight to know that you're reasonably safe, is some of the guys will be taking that, and that's not often noobish play, because it can look that way to a viewer. Is like, oh, well, that guy got the MC effect, lol, what a noob. In a lot of cases, that's actually a decision they've made themselves. It's like, it's much better for me not to move out of this because I know it's not going to hurt me. And it only lasts a few seconds anyway. But now you see this encroaching area. I love this. I actually love how Phase 1 gives you such good camera angles, which can be a big factor in a lot of fights. A bad camera can ruin it, especially with a fight like this. Everything is so perfectly visible. And you can see how this room is constantly encroaching on them. And these basic mechanics that start off really chill become so much more dangerous. We're about to see the overlap very shortly that they were trying to skip. Or they were skipping with Bloodlust when the room gets to its smallest point.
Yeah. Now it's so small that, like, if you get the beams at this point, it's like you can barely avoid getting 2 stacks. And here, that's the mind control thing.
Yep.
And it's like no space at all, basically moving around. So
yeah, you can see. I love how tight they have to get here, and then reposition very quickly. You'll see the immediate sort of spread out, getting ready for everything else as they transition into the next phase, just to make sure everything's good. And then this timing, which again, we think maybe, certainly the prediction has been that maybe they'll fix this, is Scripes using the Trident, or the Storm, is it the Storm Caller?
Yes, Storm Caller, yeah, Tempest Caller, I think, Tempest.
Yeah, just to do the 1 tick to get the effect that it'll actually kill everything, and then suiciding and using Totemic Recall or whatever in order to get back into the game.
Yeah, it's so silly when it gets to that point when the damage is still high and you just sacrifice that player to get 1 tick off or 2 ticks.
Yeah, because the raid damage here is criminal, absolutely criminal, and we've seen the healers running dry so regularly, but which is normal during progress. There's no point in trying to save mana for later on if you're not going to reach that point in the fight.
Yep.
This phase, again, little RNG in this fight, but this stomp that comes in that fills the room with that sort of half opaque purple slam, which is incredibly dangerous. That is a big thing that I've seen several players caught out by, because if you're not ready to move sort of closer to the middle, then you can't make it. Like some classes, this purple that came in there, they simply can't make it. And I've seen several of the players get clipped by it because they're not ready for that to come in, which comes with a bit of practice. And we saw another sacrifice there with Eliaio, again using the same thing, using the Stormcaller, and then quickly killing himself and using an Ankh, which is what we talked about, using Ankh as a resource in order to get back into the fight.
Yeah, fights like this makes you wish you had the sacrificial dagger, like you had back in Garrosh.
Yeah,
you get a bad debuff, you just kill yourself, and it's like, well, we're done with this debuff, and at least there's parts where you can actually do that on here, but it requires pretty precise timing to do it efficiently.
And also, it counts out mistakes, which is what's going to make this so tough for the actual kill. There's just no room for error anywhere else in a fight as dangerous as this is. Where we've seen all day is it takes such a minor mistake to cause instant death, is that it's unaffordable. You just can't do it. We need these reses elsewhere. We need to be utilizing these as an active resource in order to make sure we can continue this fight onwards. You can see how brutal this AoE damage is. Well, it's only 3 healers. Yeah.
It's the combination of when they were just using the Tempest Caller to kill off that wave of ads. It's just even just a few ticks of it on top of anything else in this fight, because you have to wiggle around when you clear the ads with whenever Uu'nat will do the Call of N'Zoth, which is his main ability that just kind of just happens periodically when his energy bar fills up. and that's a splash of raid damage. So if you don't do that at the same time, you have to then, A and B back and forth it. We're seeing another Stormcaller rotation here shortly. But
what I love to point out is their positioning and how careful they take it. It's such a sign of a really seasoned and experienced raider, and it's something I always try my best to make sure people really appreciate how important this is. An average raider will pretty much move out of something dangerous, and then they'll kind of stay wherever they are. And that, I'm out of the danger zone, continue to DPS. What you saw there is when the big purple slam came in, is as soon as it was clear, the guys weren't even trying to do damage. They just were immediately running back into that area because it's so much more important than continuing to push at that point. We've seen them now comboing.
The transition out of 2 to 3, they leave the Tempest Caller on the entire time. Oof. And here comes their Bloodlust strategy here. Yep.
So they're doing that because they can combine it with the tank shield, so they take significantly less damage, and it saves them using another anchor or another res. And also combining it with, now they've bloodlusted, you can see they actually put up the healing debuff there so they can clear the floor. And now they can go into this, finish this phase off, and actually get into the finale before this gets any worse than it is, which is what each of these phases is all about. That it's trying to finish each phase before it gets any worse than it possibly can. Because every second you spend in this phase, any second longer, it gets so much worse. But unlike normal raid tiers, there's no extra gear to come next week. There's no extra gear to go and get from Mythic Plus, which will make each of these phases shorter week on week or reset upon reset. That's not possible. They have to deal with this, which is why they could be a little bit more tactical, honestly, with how they use things like DPS cooldowns and
My goodness. I'm just looking at HP values, trying to see here. The start of phase 3 with the Lust strat and their initial burn only gets them to like 30%.
Yep. And that's what's so terrifying about this.
Yeah, there's still so much more HP to go.
Can we pause?
Just absolutely bonkers.
It really feels like when you look at this boss, and that's why I kind of brought up that weird idea a little while ago before we actually started looking at the VOD. Like, you look at the health pool of this boss and see how long this encounter actually is, and it feels like you have an entire raid's worth of health, like an entire raid tier's worth of health on one boss.
Yeah, this is the interesting thing that we're seeing there, because we're trying to make it clear just how complicated this final phase is. And they're definitely, from what I'm seeing here, I don't think they've quite nailed down exactly how they're going to deal with this. But you can see they're dealing still with the pool spawning. They need to be baited out and kept to a certain area. They're still dealing with the eyeballs crossing over the room and forcing... those mechanics literally force reposition. At the same time, they're going to be dealing with these new images that you'll see on the screen shortly, which is these little circles that are surrounding certain players, which is leech. Those players are completely unhealable at that point, and they will not be healable for the remainder of the fight. THD did confirm that you can't sacrifice those people and bring them back without the debuff. They have it. It persists through death. That's it. Once you've got it, you are no longer healable. But what they can do is sap the health of people around them. So that indicates, you want to group up. you want to make some friends. But you can't do that for several portions of this fight. One, because of the I-beam. We also have the Grand Conjunction, where you literally cannot stand near players because you're going to explode and instantly kill the raid. While simultaneously, they're going to have to constantly reposition and bait out other attacks to very specific places as to where they need to be, while keeping those players alive for as long as possible, because this phase is not going to end quickly, like, whatsoever. You can see there on the left-hand side, you see the skull marker and the orange marker, and you can start to see these extra circles appearing around players. And those are the guys who can't be healed, like, at all. So they're you can see other players are moving into their circle to try and leech their health to them. And that's what they're trying to do, is give those players some health. But you can see they're actually just dying off because the guys are forced to run across the room to deal with their own mechanics. You know what I mean? You're trying to help your friends out, but there needs to be a really sort of elegant solution as to how they're going to handle this, whether it's a case of spread collapse that we've seen in several fights in the past, while simultaneously lining that up with every timer. But to say this is going to be one of the longest ends of a fight that we've seen since Gahun, actually. Gahun and last phase was also like this, where it wasn't over quickly. Even with Bloodlust and that, it was not over quickly, and it came really down to the scraps of players left, which is a great feeling while you're there, by the way. Like, it feels awesome when it's getting down to those last couple of percent and people are starting to drop off and die, and you're like, we can make it. We could just make it a little bit more.
Yeah, the heroic back and forth for the sharing health, the unending hunger. We'll bounce back away from this one. This was Naga's POV of that 24.5%. That it takes about 2 people, I want to say. Per red circle, you put 2 other raiders in it. They don't have to stay in it the entire time. They're kind of going to like bounce in, bounce out, bounce in, bounce out. And that keeps that person that has the hunger debuff fine. But then that's the thing I was talking about with the whole spreadsheeting and back and forth, is that you get to a point in this fight where if you have 5 people with the debuff, and that real estate is roughly 10 people have to be siphoning their health. They have to stand in a certain way, in a certain pattern, that you're not overlapping in different circles because you'll only feed like 1 people, maybe 2 people you can bounce in and out of to make sure they stay alive. Then how do you do it when you have 8 players? You only have so many people because you got to take, you can kind of maybe take the tanks out of that equation. One is taking all the ads. They can't take any more damage and have their health siphoned off. And the one on Uu'nat, we've already seen how it's an absolute teeter-totter on the damage that they're taking from Uu'nat. It's kind of hard. So there is a very, very fine line this is put in. And we've seen, what does he have? He has roughly 52 million health when the raid fell apart. Still.
Can we equate that to something that makes it sound more... what bosses in BOD have got that amount of HP? So just to give some relation... Even that doesn't really mean much to me. Like I never look at health values.
You mean like overall boss health then? Let's look.
Yeah, I mean, is it like, okay, you finally get to phase 3, you've been through all this, and now you've got Jade Fire Masters to kill, you know, something like that that gives them some sort of equivalent.
Sure. I'm looking at, where's Grong? How much HP does Grong have in Mythic? He was the first one that came to mind. That's actually a good question. Let me go over, I will look for you. Because that's the way to relate it.
Yeah, if we could just side by side it with something and say, well, this is basically their phase 3. They then have to start doing this fight. Opulence has DPS cooldowns that
Opulence wouldn't count.
Fight though. Yeah, Opulence isn't realistic.
So
actually, Grong has 96 million HP on Mythic. That's basically exactly the same HP as Uu'nat comes out with when she starts Lost Phase.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah, just around
96 million. Yeah.
And that's minus the big chunks you take off by using the robots, right?
Well, that's just
so you don't even have to deal with. Yeah.
It's absurd. I feel like one of the other things I want to bring up is we keep talking about all of these things and how so many factors most likely aren't going to change. I think when you look at the race as a whole, a limit coming back into the race once we get to the new week, that's a factor that changes. But one of the factors that may actually change is roster. We know that with the MDI currently going on, there are quite a few members of Method that have been on the progression lineup time and time again that are in that tournament. They're not currently working on the boss. They haven't worked on the boss at all. And we do have some knowledge as to what their roles may be over the next coming days. I believe that ends tonight, right? So potentially tomorrow we see the roster change a little bit up against Uu'nat. How do we think that could come into play? How do we think that could really affect Method's progression against Uu'nat?
Well, I'll add to that point because we're trying to get confirmation on the MDI roster swap and who's moving around, and then we have work commitments and things like that. This is kind of a back and forth tweet when we were opening this up. I'm going to bring up the tweet by Chris Potter. And Potter said earlier today that why do they make the first hard and fun raid tier of the expansion the 2-boss mini raid that overlaps with the MDI Cup? The boss is real hard, guys. It deserved to be the end of an epic raid tier. Now, Rich pointed out that it sounded kind of not positive. I read it first off and said, like, I immediately got with Potter on this, that's a big...
Yo, follow him, bro.
I'm on a different account. I'm on flat Twitter. Come on now. I'm gonna give him a follow on a random account.
That's what you picked up on. Like, wow,
oh, come on,
like indirect shade.
Yeah.
Shade, bro, shade.
But I wonder what that's gonna do, because I mean, the MDI and the raid race are gonna be 2 separate entities. They're not gonna try to not compete with each other, because one obviously has to be treated like an esport, and they have their time at the studio and when they can actually have all the casters there. It's gonna be totally separate, right? So it's unfortunate that it syncs up at the same time. But the point takeaway from this is that we do have, let me see, double check here. we have that the Just Wait will have to be replaced by Mirrors for tanking because of work.
Not J-Dubs.
Yeah, Just Wait. And we also might be, a few of the guys for MDI will play, but might or might not. They have to figure out what roles they are going to play. So we don't actually have a confirmation on what's going to be changing, because we're going into Monday, right? Things are going to change. Obviously, MDI moves away, but 440 pulls on people versus someone that's brand new and has 0. They'll figure that out.
That's a big loss of experience.
Yeah.
Of course, he will be back after work, so it'd be a case of they still want to push. Those players are available to them now, but you might see just when Just Wait comes back, is like we'll swap back out unless we see something. But Zalia, Gingy, and Fragments were part of the MDI, and as far as I know, Amiras. Would that be correct?
I think that you looked it up earlier.
And also, Limit returns tomorrow as well.
Sure. Sorry.
The Limit boys are back at it tomorrow, and
how far
what they've had going in the lab.
Yeah, how far behind do you think that they actually are? Like is it straight up they are however many days that they haven't been rating behind, or do you think that they may be able to bounce back to a certain degree? I mean, we heard THD talk about it yesterday and what his expectations actually are for the guild. But do you think that there is a way for them to catch up with the difficulty of the boss? Like, let's say it takes another week for this boss to die. Does that mean that it's back within the grasp of Limit to take it down?
I would be highly surprised if they haven't got their strategy to reach phase 3 in stone completely. Yeah. And it will not take them that long to execute and adjust to that, because significantly less than the method guys have needed, because they've had to sort of step by step it, right? So that's always the advantage when you do see people streaming is, I mean, the fact that you can go in with a clear idea of timings of everything that's going to happen and how cooldowns are being used and all that kind of stuff. Having that knowledge is so big. Yeah. So big. And even just a class composition that seems to be working best and why, having all that knowledge is so significant compared to being there and not knowing that information, that they'll catch up. Now, if this fight, they will still need to put in the time and effort to get used to it, and for the players to get used to the movement, because watching it is nothing like playing it. Like, anybody will tell you, like, watching a raid kill video is nothing like actually trying to play the thing, right?
Of course not.
And yeah, exactly. And plus, it's hard to see. I mean, taking experience there, and I'm sure the Limit boys do have it, but it's hard to see the guys doing the very little minor jobs that you don't see what's happening. Like when are innovates going on? You don't really see that very often on any UI without following specific people. All these little things that are happening, which they'll have to figure out what's best for them, but it won't take long at all. And if this does go to the reset, which I don't think it will, but if it does, then Limit is well within their chance of picking this up.
Yeah, I mean, as Preach mentioned before, right, with Method having to do the roster changes, those players coming in basically having 0 pulls, but the guild has made the effort to progress and find out the timings, when you do what, and all that kind of stuff. So these players obviously won't need 400 pulls before they're on the same page. They will need like 20, 30 maybe. And Limit being able to watch the other guilds, after, like, they would obviously don't need 400 pulls either, because they know what strats will work, and they obviously have to figure out those tiny details, you know, what will work for them, which timings are they going to be getting slightly different, and that kind of stuff. So they will catch up very, very quickly. And then
it's crazy how quickly they'll get there.
Yeah, and if it's just a matter of perfect execution, nobody making any mistakes, whatever, I mean, any guild could kind of have it when the stars align. So at that point, it comes down to consistency of players, you know, and getting as far as you can, as often as you can, just to see the last part. You know, we don't really know what the last 20% holds in terms of timings and cooldown usage, and even if anything is doable at that point.
I'm gonna bring up, so same poll. I'm gonna just bring up Josh's POV to roll it. People were talking about. We saw it from the DPS perspective. So what does it look like from a healer perspective as the fight goes on chaotically throughout the whole thing? But I'll just bring that up here. We can keep sort of breaking down different parts of this, because the first thing that I wonder about and how these encounters have been tuned, and how, or at least how they are initially tuned. We did see that Jaina was a boss that drops 415 level gear. And then again, to go back on sort of how the stepping stone of World of Warcraft rating works, a boss is normally tuned to be about 15 eye levels lower than what they drop. That's the step up. And sometimes they're about 10, maybe. Jaina was definitely tuned to be within, I would argue, between 5 to 8. And with Jaina, you can gear up and move forward. And you have the raid resets that actually matter. You have all the BOEs that mattered. You had that creep. We were inspecting people from when we were at the Red Bull Gaming Sphere and looking at like we got 406 eye level on X, Y, and Z, and the whole thing about Josh being like the highest eye level in the entire guild at the time was a huge deal. But with Uu'nat, I wonder where his eye level balancing point is. If he drops 4 to 5 and he is tuned like Jaina, is he essentially at like the 420 range, or is he tuned for his own eye level?
I feel like he might even be tuned like you can't really say that he's tuned higher than his item level, right? Because it's just that's not real. Like it's not something that's expected inside of the game, but it almost feels like he is, right? I think that's what's so nutty about it. Like it feels like he's tuned for almost if you actually take in the skill level that it usually takes to take down another boss, it almost feels like he is tuned for, maybe not mathematically, but with 8.2 gear in mind.
Well, that's the other part that I wanted to sort of bring up at the tail end of talking about this is that what if Uu'nat is potentially doable, right? Going back to how Rich opened the show, it's possible he could be done. But what if it is, if his eye level is supposed to be an aggregate of around 420 across your entire raid group, and you can't get that discernibly outside of just super lucky until Azara's Eternal Palace opens? I don't know if Blizzard would purposefully make a raid encounter just sit around for 2 months. That would be a little bit awkward. But
No,
at the
I
same
mean,
time,
It's a fresh thing. I think that like that's the thing though, is it's like that is fresh. That's something that we haven't really seen before, which is kind of cool. I think experimenting with something like that is kind of cool in a lot of ways, and I don't mind that.
I do.
Oh yeah,
I think if it's in the game, it should be killable. And I do think I think they've tuned it like 418 with a very, very I think they've looked at the absolute potential numbers that players can put out, and they've done the math on it, and they've worked it out. And I think what we're looking at here is a boss that is perfectly tuned for the very best of the best gear and class setup you can put out there.
Yeah.
Because and it's really important we understand why this boss is different and why this conversation is going on, because it's very different than what we talked about during the Jaina progress. Is that there was no doubt certainly in the discussions we were having, is that it was killable because the guys were doing a very different strategy to now. And it is the fact that gear just isn't going to be a factor in this, which it was in Jaina, because the guys are doing it in a really under-geared state. And that's what we were looking at. It's like, is it killable without the reset? When are they going to do heroic clears? These were all the conversations we were having during Jaina. It looks like they're kind of stuck. Are they going to break off and do Mythic Plus like we saw with Fetid? But no, it's not a gear issue. And that's what the message we were seeing with what the guys were doing is like, this is not a gear issue. We're in the same boat, kind of, because this is not a gear issue at this point. It's not a gear issue. And I'm sure the guys, and we could probably go through this frame by frame, and we'll probably see when they do enter this last phase, is we will see errors and things that could have been done better. Also, what cooldowns are ready while they got into that phase. They weren't comfortable with it because they've not been there too often, and all these kind of things where the guys will say, this is fine, like this is doable. We know the things that went wrong. We clipped some things. I should have pre-shielded that guy. You know, in the case of Josh's case, you can see that he regularly pre-shields the shamans, etc. when the eyeballs are coming out. He's got that like built into his hands now to do that. And it's the same thing. It's like, what is going on in this overlap? Who do I need to focus on a little bit more and make sure they're taken care of? Do I need to shift priorities? And that needs to be second nature. And I'm pretty sure they're in that position where they're just saying to themselves, it's just little mistakes.
I'm going to bring up something that's not terribly important to the race, but just something that I'm kind of curious how you guys feel about it.
Go for it, Rich.
When you look at an encounter potentially being put in the game that is tuned for the absolute best of the best, which I think is awesome. I think that that's something that's fantastic either way. To have that real challenge, that absolute challenge that is fantastic, a spectacle to watch, but not all players will get down when it is the newest content in the game. Do you think that a tier like this should have rewards that match that difficulty that will be insane past this tier's basically ship date. So me as a player who's not nearly as good as the players in Method, once I outgear this a little bit, go, yo, let's go in there and get that juicy loot and clear this 2 boss raids here, even past the point that it came out. I'm curious how you guys feel about that. If you think the loot in here should be insane enough that even after 8.2 comes out and everybody's super geared and outgear this a little bit, have the feeling, that desire to come back and try to obtain that powerful loot.
I would just, first off, some pieces that Restless Cabal and Uu'nat drop are definitely interesting. I don't know if any of them are going to withstand the next tier at being like, oh, we should go back and grab or try to grab this. But I also don't specifically know if that's going to be a huge sticking point. I'm not sure.
No, I don't think that's going to be the case either, because lately, or like the past couple of expansions, honestly, they've gone with the design intention that the moment the new content is out, you shouldn't feel forced to do old content, right? We saw issues with that coming with Nighthall, where they had this really good trinket and people were going farming this really old trinket, or like not really old trinket, but past tier trinket, right? It was really good, it was too good, and you're just farming Titanforge procs of this because it was still the best trinket in the game, and Blizzard had to like successively nerf that so that that wouldn't be the case, because they don't want you to focus on old content, right? That's there to run, maybe have fun, get achievements, you know, catch up and stuff, but not to get the best in slot gear. And I mean, this is kind of new territory, right? And if you do kill the last boss, you do get a guaranteed 425 piece.
Yep.
And like you said, Bay, like some of the pieces, they're really good, but are they gonna do? What are we going to get in new raids? It's probably going to be like, Mythic is going to be like 440 or 445 or something. It's like, there's no way the 425 is going to be worth using at that point.
Right.
And maybe there's going to be a little bit of a like nice reward for you. You're going to be a little bit better geared in case you get bad procs in Heroic, the Ashara raid.
I think that's the reason it's interesting, though. Like the reason that it's interesting, and I think that idea can be explored again, is for the exact reason that you said. This is different territory, right? Like, as I totally agree with you. Like, it's not even an opinion. What you said is straight up fact. You look at the past raid tiers and the way that they're designed, is this is relevant while it is out. A new raid comes out, and you don't give a flying hootenanny anymore, and you let that raid tier fall into the rear view mirror, and maybe you do it on LFR every now and then for a lucky Titan Forge or to get some weird thing. But even the currency that you grab, becomes irrelevant, right? Like, Bwansamdi bucks aren't going to matter, or Tears of Bwansamdi, whatever they're called, they're not going to matter once you get into the next raid, right? Even the crafted items don't matter. There is no reason to go back at all, but we also haven't had something in between tiers before. So now that that's there, is there potential to make a powerful trinket or something like that that will last longer, have a longer shelf life than some of the rewards that we've seen in the past? I do see the worry, though, about having that old content be the focus. But if anybody's new to the game and they don't remember, if you look back to like Burning Crusade, I think there were multiple reasons for this, but you really did think about doing those previous tiers a lot more.
Yeah, but at the same point, you know, like what I'm talking about is also like, I don't know if until this gets nerfed, I'm not sure if many guilds are really gonna bother farming the gear that this gives, because as we mentioned many times before, it doesn't get easier, right? So even though you kill the boss, you're still gonna spend a fair amount of wipes compared to all previous progress, you know, on try and re-kill those bosses. Are you going to be able to even at some point, you know, use whatever classes you want to? And with the gear not increasing, I don't really think that's going to be the case as much as normal.
I would consider this a prestige tier. Similar to, I felt the same way about Hellier. Like, there was a very limited amount of guilds that managed to do Hellier sort of pre Nighthold, I think was the raid that followed it.
Yep.
And the gear was irrelevant immediately. But the fact of the matter is that was one of my most satisfying kills. I think it comes from your mentality as a raider. If you're about the gear, which is the farm process more than anything, then, you know, then maybe you're going to look at this raid as like, this is really annoying. I don't even get anything out of this. But That's not what I find, like, in a lot of the top-end Mythic guilds. I find the guys are there for the kill. They're not really that interested in what drops. Like, it's nice if you get that nice trinket or that nice thing.
Yeah.
But we're all very aware of the seasonal nature of World of Warcraft right now, right? So we're not stupid enough to think that we're probably going to replace this by doing Mythic Plus on the day the new raid comes out, right? That's the kind of situation we end up in more often than not. But we walk away taking over a really difficult fight, and that's the feeling you like. And that's what inspires a lot of people, is to be there for that moment when you're screaming and shouting. You're not going to get that on the second farm kill, right? That's not going to happen. And the loot is much more secondary, certainly now more than ever, I would say. I was just sort of bringing up that clip, though, that Baze paused it on, I believe.
Yep.
Is we can actually see exactly what we were talking about as they entered phase 3, where it kind of crumbled. And you can see the difference for those, if you have been watching the VODs. You'll actually see that when the I-beam comes across, there's obviously a lot going on. But previously, when we've seen the I-beam crossing over the players, is from Josh's POV, we saw a very slow and relaxed build up to preparing the guys for that. So a lot of pre-shields going on. It's about a few seconds earlier than this bay as it comes across.
Yep, I'm backing up.
We saw the Disc Priest, or Josh and probably the other Disc Priest doing the same, is preparing the characters who are very weak to this, because obviously the Warlocks can bypass it. Scribe can bypass it as well with teleport and so on. But we actually saw them preparing for this moment, very relaxed, very casual, and dealing with it effectively. This time, though, they were playing catch-up. It was just a case of getting into this phase and being ready for dealing with it. You can see the raid was relatively in a healthy-ish position. Not topped, but healthy-ish. But then the I-beam just starts coming across, and there's not enough time for the healers to prepare for the guys who are going to take so much more damage than anybody else. And obviously a couple of guys are definitely going to get 2 stacks because they're panicking a little bit. Like, everybody panics when you get into a new phase. So you can see there's no shields on the shamans there. He starts throwing them up, but it's kind of too late for some players. You can see Alio going down like very, very quickly as this comes over, and those players just getting slammed into the floor. And that's one of the things where they're going to say this is definitely killable, because I know what I kind of didn't do there that I should have done there. I should have prepared those guys for it. Maybe those guys would use personals elsewhere. They need it for this I-beam, because this is what's going to happen if you don't have it. And these are the things that they'll come away from this still feeling pretty confident that, yeah, they can do it, because that's a fixable situation where you can see that's probably what caused the next level of wipes is, okay, we can see the problem there. Did they have personals? I probably should have shielded them a little bit earlier and prepared them for that damage. I knew it was coming, because that's what happens during I-beam throughout the whole fight. And this is something we can work on next time we get here. I'm more aware of that.
There was an interesting part that I'm looking at here on Josh's UI as the raid teeters out here as the next beams come through. When I was watching, I had Scripe's POV up a bit today, and there's only a little bit you can sort of piece together about how much of the extra heads up that some of the raiders are looking for at different points. You see the Shield's Torment pop up for Josh that comes up right above his raid frames there, because that is coinciding with a very certain ability, and what Mike is talking about. That Scripe was working on a lot of different weak auras on his stream today about very specific parts or timing window and updating little things for the fight today that he was watching for, because of how certain things are going to overlap. And watching how much damage you just saw there, this is when the question comes into now, is how do you balance the healing requirement and what healing comp you use to the damage you need to do to the boss, and what little windows of time they still are trying to figure out and work through. Scripe was also recording a whole bunch of little parts today. You kept seeing like his shadow play popping in and out when he was recording things, like watch them back. And it's just definitely tough to look at. Not even at the 24% mark, barely, with like not even a raid that can do much else after that, with so much left ahead of them. And we don't even know what other combinations they have to deal with going forward.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't even talked about the secret phase, right? We talk about all of this, and we haven't even mentioned the secret phase yet. How absurd would that actually be? I think this is one of the only times that I've ever looked at a fight and been like, okay, there's actually no secret phase. There's just no conceivable way that there's a secret phase on this boss fight for the Mythic version. It would actually be impossible. Yeah, 20% new phase forehead.
Shogal's coming out, boys.
Right.
Shogal's on his way.
Well, at 20, he obviously like heals himself back up to 60% and then starts a completely new phase. And
What's the worst scenario you can imagine? Like, here's the worst case scenario I can imagine. is you get him to 1%. He goes, it says intermission, and he wanders out of the room, splits in two, and comes back. Just doubles everything.
What is one way to guarantee that it's impossible? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think though that one of the biggest takeaways with this raid tier though is how many nuanced ways there are to create a raid that may have not even been predicted before. Like this feels so much different than any race that we've talked about together, so much different than most of the things that we've progressed through when we were in hardcore mythic guilds. Some of you guys still obviously are. I myself am not. But it's just a completely different feeling. And I am curious, you know, with the chat too, a lot of the times, yes, there are always memes in the chat like, yeah, we're like 9 out of 8 or we're 3 out of 2 or different things like that. I wonder how many guilds in chat are working on the mythic version or how many have decided just to spectate this time around, which it seems like there's a big change. Even when I go inside random chats that are progressing and watch how people are interacting with the content, it seems a lot different. It seems a lot different. Hey, I'm a fantastic raider and leveler, as we heard yesterday. Don't you guys?
What a claim! What a claim!
What a claim! Oh my God, look at the sun. I can't even figure out how to not be in the sun. Like, what just happened here?
I think this fight, when it's all said and done, this will be regarded as one of the most difficult fights ever created. But, and I truly believe that, even if it dies within the reset, I think people will look at how this fight was designed and say, because this is so unique, it really can't be understated how unique this is. This is a fight that takes into account nothing to do with gear at all. It's the absolute pinnacle of everything you could throw at it. Yeah. Every single mechanic this fight has is designed to prevent you doing what raiders love to do, which is try and cheese things, figure out ways around certain things. I mean, the best thing we can see so far that they're manipulating is killing a player to stop some of the AoE damage, right? That's it. Everything else in the entire fight is designed to keep stopping, resetting, and making sure 100% you have to deal with everything this fight throws at you. And I almost like a middle finger from Jaina, where the elemental was ignored and they just burned it down. They're like, you know what? No, we're not doing this. We're going to make sure you have to do this fight because that is not how we want you dealing with our fights, right? And that's, as Bay said, that's how everybody does that fight now. Nobody bothers with the mechanics of the last phase, particularly. You basically walk in a semicircle and just nuke it to the ground. That's it. And that's not what they want. This fight is designed in every single way possible to ensure that the guys have to play at their peak all the way through it, and there's no bypassing it.
All right.
And that's going to be the legacy of this boss, I'm telling you.
And it's a damn good legacy. I really think it is. It is a raid that is made for the best raiders. It is raiding boiled down to its top form. It takes out so many of those extra variables, as you did mention, but it takes a lot of variables to make a show like this work. And I do want to thank all of them before we do close today. Corsair, Fertigear, Kensington Gamer, Twitch, and MSI all made this show possible. And this, of course, has just been a production put on by Method throughout the entirety of the race, which is not over yet. My prediction is coming true. It's going to be a 2-month-long race at this point, and you can stay up to date with all of the things in the race, not only on this show at the same time in the same place every single night, not only in all of the players' streams, but you can actually check out the Twitter for Method, where they'll be posting continuous updates, and also their progress website. It's one of the most fun things to check in on to see which guilds have actually been able to take down even the first boss. I think that was one of the major things where all of a sudden you see 14 bosses crashing on through, and now who is going to be the world first kill of Uu'nat? You don't want to miss it at all. We'll be back tomorrow. I think the plan is to talk a little bit about PvP and then to put a huge focus on all things the raid race. Thank you guys for tuning in. No spoilers. We're not going to put any spoilers in the chat.
No spoilers.
Everybody's like trying to get it. Why do you guys think I know what happens on Game of Thrones tonight? I don't know.
I've never heard of it.
Do we not know? But thank you, Treckie, Mike, Rich.
Thank you, as always.
Thanks for having us.
I wanted to see what your Game of Thrones pun game was going to be to take us out of here. What do you have something up?
Man, this pun that I actually have in the chamber, you not ready for it.
I just got this. Everyone's gonna die.
No.
Everyone's gonna in about an hour and 45.
I will be-
Everyone's
Oh
gonna
my
die.
God.
I will be